This is capitalism. It is alienating. Every facet of life takes on the structure of the sale of a commodity. When you open your eyes today in this social system, you are for sale. If you are to survive, you must do soul-crushing work. Every space, even your home, takes on the structure of a factory. We are surrounded by machines in our work and in our home that we are told will improve our lives. But most of them are just weapons to keep us controlled. This is not how we were meant to live. Luckily, there is someone who is willing to support you. He's here to spread the message of love and peace. He wants the whole world to rise up and overthrow its hateful leaders, and unite under a common slogan: everyone should have what they need. He is the hero of labour. Workers of the world, unite.
Today, I'm going to be reading an old party pamphlet from a long time ago. It's by a guy called Doug Lorimer. I think we should enjoy it. It's a very short pamphlet. It's very thin, as you can see, and it's on social classes and class struggle. So let's start together, shall we? Social classes and class struggle. What are social classes? Why do classes exist at certain stages in the development of society? What place do class relations occupy in social life? The correct answering of these questions supplies the key to our understanding of the essence of such important social phenomena of the modern world as the state, political relations, and ideological life. The class approach to the analysis of the life of any society divided into classes is one of the fundamental methodological principles of Marxism. Explaining the significance of this principle, Lenin wrote, "People always have been the foolish victims of deception and self-deception in politics, and they always will be until they have learnt to seek out the interests of some class or other behind all moral, religious, political, and social phrases, declarations, and promises." Social classes are large groups of people into which society are divided. But there are many other large groups in society divided on different principles from those which divide classes. There are age groups, for instance, young and old generations, groups based on sex, race, nationality, occupation, and so on. Some of these divisions have a physical basis, while others are purely social in origin. The physical differences between people do not in themselves cause social distinctions, and only under certain social circumstances may be connected with social inequality. Thus, racial inequality is historical, not natural in origin. Racial groups themselves are social categories, not biological categories. They arise through the social practice peculiar to capitalism, of fetishizing particular physical differences between people, usually skin color, in order to ascribe social values of superiority and inferiority to these physical differences, and therefore justify the imposition of social inequality based upon racial categorization. Similarly, the social inequality of the sexes is due not to natural but historical causes. At the early stages of history, during the primitive communal system, women played a leading role in society, which they subsequently lost, owing to the division of society into separate family units based on private property. Class distinctions in general usually have nothing to do with natural differences. They exist within one and the same racial, one and the same ethnic group, and cut across age and sex lines. Some bourgeois sociologists seek the causes of the division of society into classes into political factors, in coercion, for instance, in the subjugation of some people or peoples by others. Of course, the transition from classless society to class society did not occur without coercion, but coercion only accelerated and deepened social inequality. It was not its cause. Violence does not explain the origin of classes any more than robbery explains the origin of private ownership of the means of production. Robbery may result in the passing of some property from one owner to another, but it cannot create private property as such. The division of society into classes is due to economic causes. It existed, for example, in places such as ancient Egypt and ancient Athens, where no conquest had taken place. Its source in the division of labour within society, which presumes the isolation of producers engaged in various forms of production, and the exchange between them of their products of their labour. First, agriculture and livestock breeding from special branches of labour, then handicrafts break away from agriculture, and finally mental work, for example the management of labour, record keeping, public administration, is separated from manual labour. The social division of labour and exchange of surplus products brings in its train private ownership of the means of production, which supersedes the previous communal form of property and gives rise to social groups that have unequal standing in social production. Classes. Society is divided into rich and poor, exploiters and exploited, and a state of inequality reigns. As Engels put it, these warring classes of society are always the products of the modes of production and of exchange, in a word, of the economic conditions of their time. Classes were formed in two ways. First was through the emergence out of the Neolithic village communes of the river valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates in southern Iraq and the Nile River Valley in Egypt of a stratum of specialists who developed and monopolized the knowledge and skill needed to direct large-scale public works. Agriculture in these desert river valleys was dependent upon large-scale irrigation works, which required the cooperative efforts of many village communities. In Egypt, water was provided by the annual flooding of the Nile River. However, it required the building and maintenance of large numbers of dikes and water basins to provide a regular source of water for irrigating crops. In southern Iraq, otherwise known as Sumer, the annual flood of the Tigris and Euphrates was insufficient, and water for irrigating farmland required the construction and maintenance of an extensive network of canals. The construction of these irrigation works necessitated special knowledge and the centralized direction of the labor of many village communities, as well as knowledge and organizing authority, which became concentrated in the hands of a minority made up of the village priests and clan chiefs who lived off the surplus product of peasant farmers. At first, this surplus product was voluntarily provided by the village communes to support the organizers of large-scale irrigation projects. However, as these organizers and administrators consolidated into a coherent group living together in a town, usually centered on a temple, the tribute made by the surrounding village communities was extracted through force, and the society became divided into an exploited class of peasant craftspeople and an exploited class of priest officials, headed by a priest king who, as the earthly representative of the temple deity, established his private ownership of the land. This was the general pattern out of which the first class divided societies, based upon the tributary Asiatic mode of production, arose in Sumeria and ancient Egypt around 5,500 years ago. The second way in which classes were formed was by the means of an enslavement of members of other tribes conquered in battle, or of the impoverished members of one's own tribe who had fallen into debt. This was the general pattern out of which the slave-owning societies emerged in ancient Greece and, later, in ancient Rome, in the first millennium BC. In summarizing the experience of the development of classes, Marxism for the first time furnished an authentic scientific explanation for the essence of classes, the reasons for their emergence, and the means to achieve their abolition. Karl Marx associated the existence of classes with specific historical phases in the development of social production, while bourgeois social scientists had never taken that into consideration. They regarded classes as an extra-historical and perpetual phenomenon. For example, there will always be rich and poor people, they say. Marx proved the historically transient nature of class-divided society and showed why and when class society would be abolished and replaced by a classless society. Marx proved that capitalist society is the last society in human history with antagonistic classes. The path leading to classless society, Marx maintained, lies through the proletariat's class struggle against all forms of oppression, and it too aimed at establishing its class rule in society. In a letter written in March 1852 to Joseph Windemeyer in New York, Marx noted that no credit is due to me for discovering the existence of classes in modern society, or the struggle between them. Long before me, bourgeois historians had described the historical development of this class struggle, and bourgeois economists the scientific anatomy of the classes. What I did in particular was prove, 1, that the existence of classes is only bound up with particular historical phases in the development of production. 2, that the class struggle necessarily leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat. 3, that this dictatorship itself only constitutes the transition to the abolition of all classes and to a classless society. Lenin further developed Marx's theory of classes and defined them as large groups of people, differing from each other by the place they occupy in a historically determined system of social production. By their relation, in most cases fixed and formulated in law, to the means of production by their role in the social organisation of labour, consequently, by the dimensions of the share of social wealth of which they dispose and the mode of acquiring it. Classes are groups of people, one of which they can appropriate the labour of another, owing to the different places they occupy in a definite system of social economy. Let us examine this definition in more detail. Classes, says Lenin, are large groups of people that are distinguished primarily by their place in a historically determined system of production. This means that every class must be regarded in connection with the mode of production by which it is engendered, and that each antagonistic mode of production creates its own specific division of society into classes. For example, land-owning nobles, tribute-paying peasant villagers, slave owners and slaves, feudal lords and serfs, capitalists and proletarians. Within every system of production, classes occupy different or even diametrically opposed positions, this being determined by their relationship to the means of production. The relations of production in a class-divided society are relations of exploitation, of domination, and subordination. This is due to the fact that the ruling class has a monopoly of the decisive means of production, that is, it possesses the most important means of production. Wherever one section of society monopolizes the means of production, the producers must, in addition to the working time they expend providing for their own subsistence, spend additional working time on providing for the owner of the means of production. The relationship of the classes to the means of production also depends on their role in the social organization of labor. Classes perform various functions of social production. In class-divided societies, some of them manage production, control the economy and all social affairs, and are engaged predominantly in mental work, while others bear the whole burden of compulsory, arduous physical labor. As social production and the whole life of society grows more complex, various functions of control become necessary. In the agrarian societies of Iraq, Egypt, China, and India, for example, large-scale irrigation works demanded specialized knowledge and centralized organization of labor that was not needed in either small, individual, or simple communal farming. The large-scale machine production today would be unthinkable without organizing activity, without management of production in all its fields. In class society, the management of social production is usually in the hands of a class that owns the means of production. Marx observed, it is not because they are a leader of industry that a person is a capitalist. On the contrary, they are a leader of industry because they are a capitalist. The leadership of industry is an attribute of capital, just as in feudal times the functions of general and judge were attributes of landed property. When certain production relations begin to hold up the development of productive forces, the role of the ruling class in the social organization of labor also changes. It loses its organizing function in production and declines into a parasitic growth on the body of society. This happened with the slave owners and the feudal aristocracy in their time, and the same thing has happened to the big bourgeoisie. It has relinquished its organizing functions to salaried managers, supervisors, and even teams of workers. Classes also differ from one another according to the size and the source of their social income. This distinction between classes is undoubtedly of great importance, but is also not the defining factor. We can see this quite easily if we ask ourselves the question, why do various sources of income exist, and consequently, various conditions for the existence of classes? The chief reason lies in their position in the social system of production. At first sight it may appear, as Marx said, that a class is formed by people having common sources of income, but this view does not go to the bottom of class relationships. What it assumes to be the main and determining relationships are, in fact, a form of distribution that depends on the relations of production. If we only consider the sources and sizes of income, we cannot correctly define classes and distinguish them from the multiple social strata of groups that may also receive their income from various sources. Under capitalism, for instance, Workers in the same occupation have different sources of income. Some clerical workers receive their wages from private employers, others from the state. Highly skilled workers are paid more than unskilled workers. But does this give us grounds for treating them as separate classes? Class divisions run right through social life from top to bottom, affecting the whole system of social relations. These relations are divided into material and the ideological. But what kind of relations are established between classes, material or ideological? The answer is both. Classes are connected by certain economic relations which enable the exploiting classes to appropriate the labour of the exploited. The sum total of these relations forms the class structure of society and constitutes the material, economic basis of the class struggle. The relations between classes, however, are not confined to the economic field. They acquire their most concentrated expression in political life. Finally, the relations between classes, the class struggle, are revealed in the sphere of ideology, in the intellectual life of society. As the founders of Marxism noted, the opposition between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, which is rooted in the production relations of capitalism, affects the whole of social life. The living conditions of these classes, their domestic relations, and the fact that the workers have different ideas and notions, morals and moral principles, and conduct different policies from those of the bourgeoisie. Such differences characterizing the position of members of classes in everyday life, in education and culture, their ideas, beliefs, and social psychology are derived from economic relations. Besides class distinctions in society, there are other social distinctions, for example, the distinction between town and country, that is, in the final analysis between the population engaged in industrial and agricultural work, and also distinctions between people engaged in physical and mental labour. The division between town and country splits the whole population into two parts, one living in the town, the other in the country. The division has unique features in every class formation. For example, in feudal society, the classes of peasants and the feudal lords were concentrated mainly in the countryside, whereas the towns were the centres of the artisans, the traders, and the emerging bourgeoisie. In capitalist society, all social classes are represented, although to a different degree, both in the town and in the country. Hence, the division of the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie into urban and rural, the division of the working class into the urban and rural proletariat, and so on. Group distinctions expressing the existence of smaller groups within classes are also considered social distinctions. For example, the bourgeoisie itself is divided into small, medium, and big capitalists, depending on the amount of capital that they own. There may also exist in society more or less significant groups of people that do not belong to any definite class. Such, for example, are students who, say, live off state grants, or police officers who are salaried employees but whose role in the system of capitalist production is to protect the private property of capitalists. And also the declassed people who have lost their connection with their own class. Such, for example, is the lumpen proletariat under capitalism, who consists of people who have no definite occupation. Among diverse social distinctions, the main and definitive are class distinctions. First, they spring from the deepest foundations of society, that is, directly from the relations of people to the means of production, from the essence of the production relations, which determine all other social relations. Second, classes are the most powerful and usually the most numerous social groups, whose interrelations and struggle exert a decisive influence on the whole history of society, on its entire social, political, and ideological life. Bourgeois sociologists often attempt to dissolve the concept of class into the more general concept of the socioeconomic group. This is defined by income level, and to replace the division of capitalist society into classes by division into social layers, strata. Such terms as strata and stratification are borrowed from geology to denote the division of society into various layers, and this usually implies a certain hierarchy. All kinds of criteria are used to determine the composition of the various strata, such as occupation, wealth, education, place of residence, and so on, but no emphasis is placed on the main and decisive factor, the place people occupy in the capitalist system of production, and therefore their relation to the means of production. It is this which determines their share of social wealth and the way they receive it. As Lenin wrote, the fundamental criterion by which classes are distinguished is the place they occupy in social production, and consequently, the relation in which they stand to the means of production. Bourgeois sociology analyzes classes in terms of occupational categories and income statistics, and thus reaches the conclusion that the great majority of workers in the advanced capitalist countries are part of a white-collar occupational and middle-income socioeconomic group, and are hence the middle class. By contrast with this superficial method, Marxism holds that classes form in relation to one another and are fundamentally defined by the place they occupy in the system of social production by their relationship to the means of production. Thus, for example, the bourgeoisie is not simply a group of business people with a lot of money, nor is the proletariat just a mass of poor people with lousy jobs. Rather, these two classes are defined by their specific relation to each other in the capitalist system of social production. The capitalists own and control the means of production and subsistence, while the proletariat owns nothing but its labour power, as a result of which capitalists are able to hire the workers and appropriate their labour, making a profit by ensuring the workers produce more value than they were paid. The Marxist approach to classes is designed to uncover the actual exploitative and oppressive relations between classes, which give rise to the class struggle between them, and that propels history forward. By contrast, bourgeois sociology determines classes in isolation from one another, by means of income size or occupation, and thus obscures the exploitative and oppressive content of the relations between classes in capitalist society, and therefore obscures the material basis for the struggle between them. Thank you very much.